Oh yeah! Woo! Rock and roll sucks. Yeah, it was good. It was a good film. You should go watch it. Alright, before I begin with this review, I should note that I have a throat cold, although, now that I mentioned it, I think the worst of the throat cold has gone away. Thanks God. Also, here are my Christmas buddies here. It is that time of the year. Ho, ho, ho. It's been a rather interesting progression to see where this film franchise has begun. I remember way back when that first teaser trailer for the first movie was released, and people were very hesitant to see it due to ugly Sonic. But then, Jeff Fowler proved himself to be one of the few filmmakers in Hollywood who was actually willing to listen to his respective fan base. And so he made necessary adjustments and changes, and the first Sonic movie was a smash hit.
He needed human characters, so he comes to Earth looking like that, fans rioted. Then he comes to Earth to hang out with James Marsden.
And they were able to admit their faults with Ugly Sonic, just like how SEGA is willing to admit their faults with some of their games that they've made. Ugly Sonic did make an appearance in one of 2022's more unusual movies, Chip 'n Dale's Rescue Rangers, but that's a topic for another time. But needless to say, I then watched the Sonic movie, and I remember making a review video. That would be a feature length. I remember making a review video for the first Sonic movie. I even made a review video talking about Sonic's redesign, complimenting that, and then I made the review video about the first Sonic movie, talking about how I consider the first Sonic movie to be the best mediocre movie ever, because much of that film was very much dragged down by buddy road trip Hollywood tropes that brought down the movie from what its full potential would be, given the fact that it's a Sonic the Hedgehog themed movie and that would have been full of action stuff like that. I mean, unless they went to a more character study route like a Studio Ghibli, but obviously not. It's the sort of goofy kind of Hollywood movie that you would expect, so it could have been more. But at the same time, the first Sonic movie did have its pleasant surprises, including Jim Carrey in a hilarious performance as Robotnik, and he was clearly having the time of his life. So they took everything from the first Sonic movie, including learning the criticism of that really painfully forced Olive Garden advertising, and they learned from their mistakes to make Sonic the Hedgehog 2. Now, yes, there was still a few flaws in Sonic the Hedgehog 2, but overall, at the time, people considered this to be one of the superior video game adaptations. Now, that says a lot, because video game adaptations tend to not be that great overall. Although, with that said, there was this one cartoon show, the Sat AM channel, where there was a Sonic show that is still beloved to this day, and certainly nowadays we're seeing more and more gradually great video game adaptations in film form and in television form. Needless to say, the reason why Sonic the Hedgehog 2 was a more beloved adaptation than its predecessor was because it took a lot more influence from the fun and the world building of the Sonic games, as well as further indulging in the fun and the action and the spectacle of it all. So that was one of the main highlights of 2022. A fun movie overall. And earlier, I managed to have the chance to see the Knuckles mini-series for Paramount Plus. Now, this is probably of the same kind of quality as the first Sonic movie in the fact that it's very kiddish. Looking back at this now, you're not really missing much if you don't see this series, because I actually saw this series in advance for any potential details for the third Sonic movie, and without giving too much away, there's not really much you're missing out on other than the friendship between Knuckles and Wade. That's pretty much it, although there's a really nice scene between Knuckles and Wade's family celebrating a Jewish feast, so that was sweet. So, the series was having some mixed to positive reception as of right now, but then by the end of Sonic the Hedgehog 2, there was a teaser that the fan favorite Sonic character, Shadow the Hedgehog, was going to make an appearance.
Did I feel any pressure playing Shadow? The answer is yes. We're some kind of recording of Sonic 2, the end credits, and you'd hear people just screaming. It was so cool to hear that. Just the love.
He looks just like you.
Impossible. You are no match for me. Hopefully people like my shadow.
And that implied that they were going to adapt Sonic Adventure 2, and I and many others were hyped. We were absolutely hyped because Sonic Adventure 2 Battle is one of the best Sonic games ever made. I've already made a review video talking about why I love this specific game so much, so go watch that video if you haven't already. But needless to say, we were looking forward to this. Although, when trailers came out, it was very clear that it wasn't going to be the exact same story as what we got in this game here. But what came to many fans' surprise was having trailers show up in which the character of Dr. Gerald Robotnik was depicted to be still alive in the film. Now, this is quite the surprise for fans because in the present time of setting up this game, Gerald Robotnik is already dead, but by the third film, Gerald Robotnik is still alive.
Jim Carrey always plays different characters, even if he's playing one, but this time, he's literally playing two different people.
It's impossible.
Is it?
It couldn't be.
Couldn't it?
Are you? In the saggy flesh.
In the saggy flesh. Me and my friend love that line, it's so funny. SEGA and Paramount dedicated this entire year of 2024 to be the Year of Shadow, a celebration of Shadow the Hedgehog, this anti-hero who eventually saves the day, and they were even going as far as to have downloadable content for Sonic X Shadow Generations, where you have a single level where Game Shadow transforms into a new form similar to the movie version of Shadow with the more textured, spiky details, and going through a level set in Tokyo, Japan. And instead of being voiced by Kirk Thornton for that scene, he's voiced by the one and only Keanu Reeves. So needless to say, the hype was real. Many people, ever since 2022, were highly anticipating this movie. This movie was set to release at the tail end of 2024, and it was hyped up. So many trailers, so many advertisements, so much anticipation, and Disney thought they could compete with that much hype given their reputation. Sorry, people who made Mufasa the Lion King. You're not going to beat Sonic 3. Sorry, Lin-Manuel Miranda. You really should have applied your talents to Moana 2 when you had the chance. With all that setup displayed, did the third Sonic the Hedgehog movie live up to the hype? Yes, it did! Oh, it was so awesome! Safe to say, the third Sonic the Hedgehog movie is the best of the entire trilogy of movies so far, and yes, there is a teaser at the end of the movie indicating that there's going to be more Sonic content to come. There's a fourth Sonic movie in the making as we speak. But even so, this third movie stands out as a brilliant conclusion to this trilogy, if you will, for now, of Sonic the Hedgehog live-action movies. It's so brilliant. It works well for fans as a loving homage to Sonic Adventure 2. It works well for casual fans, for people who just like, this kind of Hollywood kind of movies. And it works well as a family movie. It's certainly a better family movie than Mufasa the Lion King. Just absolutely fantastic. So, where do I even begin with the movie? Start from the beginning, when you get to the end. I suppose in regards to the third Sonic movie, I should say that they definitely learned their lessons from the previous Sonic movies. Yes, the third Sonic movie still has a few flaws, but watching this entire live-action Sonic movie lineup, as well as the miniseries, has been absolutely worth it in anticipation for the third Sonic movie, because as of recording right now, I consider the third Sonic movie to be one of the best video game adaptations ever made now. Again, not a perfect adaptation, there are still flaws in it, but it's definitely the best of the bunch, and there's so much hype! I mean, it is great that it is adapting Sonic Adventure 2. It is great that there's just so much love and passion thrown into it. At the same time, the film might be a wee bit too fast-paced at times, and maybe there could have been a few instances when they could have taken a different direction slightly, but honestly, other than that, this movie is a great, fantastic movie. So what makes this movie so great? Okay, so I might as well give you a summary of the story. I'll give you mild spoilers, but then there'll come a part of the video where I'll have to give away major spoilers to really evaluate my thoughts on this movie. So me and my friend went to see the movie. Here we're gonna get into minor spoilers, so you have been warned. So, the third Sonic movie is a very loose adaptation of Sonic Adventure 2 Battle, in the fact that it does give Shadow the same core character arc that he has from his game, except there's major differences. Rouge the Bat is nowhere to be seen, and Gerald Robotnik is still alive for the duration of this movie. The scientific base that Shadow was raised in is no longer directly in space, but rather on Earth. So Maria's on Earth, whereas in the game, Maria had a disease that denied her access to go to Earth. And I find it interesting that they decided to take this route, because as a long-time passionate Sonic fan, I find it interesting that they decided to go for the route of a loose adaptation with having Eggman actively interact with his grandfather rather than indirectly with him with his diaries, because it allows Dr. Robotnik and his grandfather Gerald to have some unique character interactions, as well as the brilliant goofiness that we'd expect from Jim Carrey playing two characters at once this time, which is great hilarity. I find changes like that interesting because that's the brilliant potential that adaptations have. You see, with adaptations, you don't always have to follow a story beat for beat. If you can adapt a story in a way that can give some new insights that genuinely work, in a way that doesn't alienate the core fan base, then by all means, make a new interpretation of the adaptation. You can go through it from so many angles. Like, for example, you could have a new version of Little Red Riding Hood told from the story of Grandma, for example. You know, the core story is still there, but it's just told from a new perspective. So, yes, a lot of core plot elements are changed, but this is a loose adaptation, so there's some new perspectives into the story that I found very interesting. And obviously, given the fact that this is the very Hollywoody kind of movie that these Sonic movies tend to go for, especially given the sort of buddy road trip vibes that the first movie intended with.
I just thought you might like a latte with steamed Austrian goat milk.
Of course I want a latte. I love the way you make them!
I think they got the best overall balance between Sonic interacting with his human friends, combined with the more Sonic-y, action-packed elements that you get from the games. They managed to have the two collide together in a very meaningful way, and I don't just mean with the relationship between Shadow and Maria and her tragic fate. I also mean that with Sonic's relationship with his human caretakers, especially when the stakes are raised by the last act of this movie. But I'll get into that later when I go into major spoiler territory.
Now by Sonic 3, the main human characters are the Robotniks. There is a military presence in the movie. Kristen Ritter's kind of heading that up, but she doesn't have a lot of screen time, and the military presence itself is there for Shadow the Hedgehog's backstory. Ties into that. It kind of works as a double-edged sword though, because there's a scene where the human characters are finally given something to do, and it kind of comes out of nowhere. It kind of comes across as what I imagine it actually was, a contractual obligation to have them in the third film still. But it does come across as out of place, awkward, and for nothing else shows us, well, but we don't actually need them anymore. Now, Shadow the Hedgehog being the new addition, how is he? I thought he was great. He's a complex character who's experienced a lot of pain in his life. He's damaged. Voiced by Keanu Reeves. Really, his backstory is the heart, if not tragedy, of the entire film. Idris Elba as Knuckles? Absolutely. Keanu Reeves as Shadow the Hedgehog? Perfect. And he is perfect. He reads the lines in the most Keanu fashion possible. Yeah, but what are we doing here? I'm going to hurt them the way they hurt me. At no point is there any question that Keanu Reeves is being Keanu. His best voice work is still Johnny Silverhand in Cyberpunk 2077. Amazing.
We start off with Shadow being imprisoned in Prison Island, which is significantly smaller than it was in the game. And in this adaptation, it's in a place in Tokyo, Japan. Shadow escapes because someone hijacked the systems, and Shadow managed to get out and take down the soldiers and then run across the sea and start his pursuit for revenge. Meanwhile, Sonic, Tails, and Knuckles and their human friends and the dog are celebrating Sonic's Happy Earth Day, which is quite clever. And they're enjoying some family time and just being friends and family, just enjoying the kinship that happens there. But then the G.U.N organization manages to come on in, and they get Sonic, Tails, and Knuckles to help them to try to get Shadow. Or, as G.U.N actively calls them, Team Sonic. Which not only works as a joke in the context of the movie, but also to fans of Sonic. Team Sonic is literally the name of the specific group of people who are in charge of making the Sonic games. So the Sonic team pun goes both ways. There are some other mentions to Sonic Adventure 2, like when Sonic says one of his opening lines before the cityscape level happens. Some people might say that was a bit honed in, but I was just very giddy. I was very happy to hear Sonic say that. So Sonic and friends make it to Tokyo, and they confront Shadow, and Shadow is an overwhelming opponent for the three of them. They find rest for a while, and they find rest at the cafe to try to recuperate and regather their thoughts and try to get to the bottom of this mystery. So they go to this Chow Garden themed cafe, restaurant place, which is a brilliant homage to Chow Garden from the Sonic Adventure 2 game. And it's very cute and fun overall. There is a very rushed scene with Commander Walters, I believe his name was, giving a bit of explanation before he gets killed off, apparently, leading to Sonic, Tails, and Knuckles trying to chase down this one guy who took down some of Eggman's drones, only for the driver to reveal himself to be Agent Stone, revealing to them that he was not the one responsible for controlling the drones. So they meet Robotnik, who has gotten fully fat and egg-shaped now in a really hilarious manner, being Jim Carrey. They find out that because Ivo Robotnik was not the one in control of the drones, Ivo decides he can trace down the origin of whoever hacked his drones by referring to the GPS origin point of where it came from. So, seeing how Sonic and Ivo are currently going after the same target to try to get Shadow down, they decide to team up. So, much to their begrudgment, they do so.
Hey! Let's do this!
And they enter the military base where Shadow was raised. Now, interesting to note, in the games, Gerald Robotnik was working on the Ultimate Life Form, and the Bio-Lizard is mentioned in the movies, but only makes an appearance as a movie monster that Maria and Shadow watches, which is both a reference to the Ultimate Life Form project in the game, but also serves as a means of getting Shadow to reflect on, is he a monster, is he not, in the constant context of the movie. You see, in the games, Gerald Robotnik tried to work on an Ultimate Life Form with the Bio-Lizard, but that went haywire, so we had to put that away, and that led to the controversial trouble that got him and his team hunted down by G.U.N later on. And it was after the Bio-Lizard incident that he would then create Shadow from the ground up, combined with the alien DNA of Black Doom. Whereas in the movies, Shadow mysteriously just came by a meteorite, and he was basically raised in the military base from there. So, interesting approach. I mean, I guess the meteor origin for Shadow works in the context of the movies, because in the first Sonic movie, it's explained that Sonic and his pals come from an alien world. So, it makes sense to say, oh, Shadow's from an alien world too. So, maybe people could have said, oh, maybe they could have gone with the whole route of Gerald making Shadow from the ground up. But I think the fact that Shadow came by meteorite further hones into the common theme that Sonic and his friends are from an alien world, so that means so would Shadow. And I guess for the sake of the movies, that further emphasizes the themes of similarities and contrast between Sonic and Shadow, because they really point out the similarities between Sonic and Shadow in that whereas Sonic found family at the end of his struggles, Shadow, at the end of his similar struggles, found tragedy and lashed out in vengeance. And that definitely plays a prominent role in the film, which I'll explain later on. They explore the base. Shadow takes out many of the party members, with the exception of Ivo Robotnik. And Ivo Robotnik encounters his grandfather, Gerald Robotnik, who is just as goofy as his grandson, given the fact that they're both hilariously portrayed by Jim Carrey.
And Jim Carrey playing double trouble in here as he returns as Dr. Robotnik and also plays his grandfather, Dr. Robotnik. They play off of each other really well. That is to say, Jim Carrey plays off of Jim Carrey really well. I will say this is the most, I guess, unhinged is the phrase that I've seen Jim Carrey in the Sonic films.
Although, even though Jim Carrey is having the time of his life being absolutely goofy as these two characters, Jim Carrey's not afraid to get much more serious than when he needs to. I think a lot of people often forget that Jim Carrey did play prominent serious roles, especially in films like Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind and The Truman Show and A Christmas Carol and a few others that are probably worth mentioning. Jim Carrey can get pretty serious when he wants to, and when Jim Carrey wants to get intimidating as Gerald, he really goes for it. You can really sense that as goofy as Gerald is just fueled by vengeance. And I watched this one reviewer point out an ending scene in Sonic Adventure 2, and it's interesting, in this game you hear Eggman saying, "I always admired my grandfather because of the things that he did. Did he really do all the things out of vengeance?"
As a child, I looked up to my grandfather because of all the great things he accomplished in his life. He was my hero, and I wanted to be a great scientist like him.
So I guess that aspect of the relationship is played into more directly in this adaptation. So we see Gerald interact with Ivo more directly, both in very goofy ways, but also as the film progresses, we see that Gerald is very much motivated by vengeance and what G.U.N did to such an innocent soul as Maria. Eventually, Sonic, Tails, and Knuckles almost get killed, but they escape and they get the help of their human friends. So the action shifts from one place to another and then to London, where there's this big Tom Cruise style operation at a G.U.N center where the two Robotniks and Shadow have to acquire a second keycard necessary to activate the Eclipse Cannon. That's another major difference. In the game, the Eclipse Cannon is activated by gathering all 7 Chaos Emeralds into the Space Colony Ark, whereas in the movies, you need 2 keycards to activate the Eclipse Cannon. It's also worth noting that in the game, the base where Shadow was raised and the Eclipse Cannon were in the same location, so Shadow and Maria spent their lives in space, whereas the film is completely different. But from this point onward, we're going to go into some major territory. And something else that interests me about this being a loose adaptation, I was talking to this with my friend who I saw this in the cinemas with, is that being a big fan of this game series, especially of this particular game, I knew what was going to happen, given the fact that it's an adaptation of this game. But given the fact that it was a loose adaptation, I didn't know how it was going to happen. So that really interested me. So for that reason, I would recommend that you watch this, even if you're familiar with this game, because we're about to get into some major spoiler territory. Seriously, do not watch this segment unless you've actually seen the movie, okay? Come back to me once you've seen the movie. You seen it? Are you back? You sure? Alright. Don't say I didn't warn you. So, right at the end of the London operation, Tom disguises himself as the dead commander, but unfortunately he encounters Shadow, and Shadow mistakes Tom for the commander who was responsible for Maria's death. So Shadow gives him a serious beating, although as far as I'm aware, it's just a single punch. And I'm pretty sure Tom could walk that off, but at the same time, Shadow is quite powerful. I don't know. I mean, another criticism I would point out in the film is that Shadow probably should have been much more brutal to Tom to further justify Sonic's character arc in this movie. And another thing that my friend pointed out is that as hilarious as that laser room scene with the two Robotniks was, my friend found it quite distracting that the laser-proof suits didn't cover their heads, so they could go through the entire room just fine, but somehow their heads were not affected, which was rather distracting for him. But other than that, it was a well-developed scene with high stakes, and the gravity panel room also raised the stakes. And then eventually, Shadow beats the ever-loving snot out of Tom to the point where he's pretty much near dead, and that drives Sonic to the same level of anger and vengeance as Shadow is. Eventually, Sonic becomes no better than Shadow.
And I always appreciate it when a kid's movie has that, you know, pain. No, heart, soul, a lesson, you know, the dangers of letting the pain of your past change you as a person.
And this leads to a lot of conflict between Sonic and Knuckles. And I guess we have some payoff for the Knuckles miniseries with Wade being the official guardian of the Master Emerald, but given the fact that they dedicated an entire miniseries to the friendship between Knuckles and Wade, they could have done a little bit more there. But hey-ho, at least they did something. So Sonic takes the Master Emeralds from Wade and turns into Super Sonic and tries to fight off against Shadow and the two Robotniks running the Eclipse Cannon. And as it turns out, Agent Stone found out that Shadow had no intention of ruling the world but to destroy it, just as Gerald wanted. Agent Stone tries to warn Ivo, but Ivo's not willing to listen because he's too enamored with his grandfather. But then Ivo finds out the hard truth that Gerald wants to destroy the world, but Ivo's in disagreement with it because he wants to rule the world, not destroy it. And so this is a deep betrayal for Ivo. But Sonic eventually leaps in with the Chaos Emeralds and he tackles down Shadow, and then Sonic and Shadow get into a fully blown Dragon Ball Z style fight where Sonic seems to have the upper hand at first, but then Shadow does a similar thing that Knuckles did to Sonic in the Sonic 3 game, where Knuckles gets rid of the Chaos Emeralds within Sonic, and then the two of them absorb the energy of the Chaos Emeralds, and they have a full-on Super Saiyan fight throughout the world, and then to these ruins, and then on the moon. It's an insane fight. And eventually, Sonic would have gone through with the hollow response of revenge, but he doesn't go through with it because he realizes how empty revenge is. And even though Shadow was goading him into doing it, but Sonic reminds himself that he always has a choice. There's always that metaphysical reality that we don't have to be defined by our circumstances. We always have that choice that cannot be empirically measured, and we can choose to be better. And Shadow remembers what Maria said about how the light of the star shines even though the original star has faded away, which is a scientific fact, which is used as a metaphor for how the spirit lives on even after death. And the way that Sonic and Shadow reconcile with each other was kind of heartfelt, honestly. I almost felt like I was getting near tearful just there. And then, oh my days, that exchange between Sonic and Shadow on the moon was deeply profound. And then when they transform back into their super forms, live and learn, please, in the cinema! My friend at that point described that I was shaking the entire row due to how excited I was. Yes! Oh my days, that made me so happy. I was so happy! There's this big epic final conclusion, including a very hilarious battle between the two Robotniks, with a scene that's very reminiscent of that one part in Anchorman of no touching of the hair or face, even though Ivo does eventually cut one half of his mustache anyway. And so all the characters get together. Gerald gets zapped by the very energy stuff that he was responsible for making in collaboration with Shadow. And Ivo teams up with Tails, Knuckles, and Sonic and Shadow to stop the Eclipse Cannon from destroying the Earth, although they do pay homage to the game by having Eggman accidentally destroy part of the moon. Nice shout out to the game. Sacrifices are made, last-ditch calls are made, and to my surprise, there was a surprisingly heartfelt sacrificial scene with Jim Carrey as Ivo Robotnik, giving out a live stream of him apologizing to Dr. Stone. I thought that was surprisingly rather heartfelt. If this is Jim Carrey's legitimate last performance as this particular depiction of Ivo Robotnik, it's quite a good way to send him off. And it'd be sad to see him go, but that's a good way to end off the character. That's a good character arc, if you ask me. The film ends in a really satisfying manner. And, of course, then there's the post-credit scene where it's revealed that Metal Sonic's going to appear, as well as Amy Rose. And then there's a post-credit scene where, of course, Shadow is still alive. There might have been a few details that people left out in the dark might not get, but the Sonic fans will completely understand, like the nature of Shadow's inhibitor rings, which I told my friend prior to seeing the film. But needless to say, the film was awesome, and it's one of the best video game adaptations ever! So, now that I've told you the summary, Yeah, there were a few distracting elements, such as the fact that the laser-proof suits of both Robotniks in that one scene didn't cover their faces. The film was probably a bit too fast-paced. Yes, I know the film is long enough as it is, but at the same time, I think there could have been just a few extra minutes worth of extra scenes. Maybe they'll have a director's cut where they'll have a few extra scenes. I mean, it wouldn't surprise me if there wasn't, but it would be nice to have a few extra scenes where some things like the inhibitor rings and some other details are explained more for not only the casual audiences, but also give more character development for longtime fans. I did praise the fast-paced plot of Sonic Adventure 2 Battle, but that was because the fast-paced plot in that game worked in the context of the urgency of the events in this game. Whereas the film felt more fast-paced than the game, if you ask me. I mean, it's not to say that the urgency wasn't there, it's just that there could have been a few extra minutes worth of character development. Even the game knew when to slow down to develop the characters a wee bit and have some moments of reflection. I mean, the film does that too, but I think the game does the slowing down and pacing just a wee bit better. So, I love this movie, I honestly do. I will happily get this movie on Blu-ray.
In the end, it's one of those movies I don't mind saying this is probably the one to take your kids to.
I will rate this movie a 10 out of 12. It's not as good as the game that it's adapting, but my days, the anticipation for this movie was absolutely worth it. It's satisfying for the fans, it's satisfying for people who actually liked this live-action Sonic Adaptation series. It's awesome as a family film, it's awesome as an action film, it's a great film all around. So if you haven't seen it already, go watch it, it's amazing. If you agree with me or if there is anything you'd like to see in the comments down below, please get a conversation started in the comment section down below. And man, let's just spread the love around. This movie is awesome and so are all of you. ScotsThinker signing out.